they said it wasn't humanly possible. But now you can have all the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable, it's in stereo, and its games are...
Since the dawn of portable gaming, if there's one genre that never really felt at home on a handheld, it was the first-person shooter. Despite being home to some of the best games of all time, neither the Nintendo DS or Game Boy could ever produce something on par with what you'd see on a home console. Even Metroid Prime Hunters, arguably the best attempt at an FPS to ever grace a Nintendo handheld, fell prey to the system's limitations. With the release of Sony's premier handheld, the PSP, came more attempts to bring a first-person shooter to a portable system. The most notable of these efforts came in the form of the Medal of Honor games developed by Team Fusion. Like Metroid Prime Hunters though, I'd argue that these games were severely limited by the constraints of their home system. Thankfully, hope that first-person shooters can not only survive on a portable but actually thrive was reignited with the reveal of the PlayStation Vita, Sony's successor to the PSP. Boasting much more powerful hardware, dual analog sticks, and a pair of triggers, the Vita had the potential to at last deliver FPS games on a handheld that were on par with what you'd see on the PS3 and Xbox 360. So, roughly 7 years later, did the Vita ultimately live up to that potential? To definitively answer that question, let's run down the very best shooters to ever grace the system, or any portable console for that matter. From cinematic first-person experiences to thrilling third-person adventures, here are the 10 best shooters to ever release on the PlayStation Vita. I want you to think back to 2012. Call of Duty Black Ops 2 is on the horizon, and Activision's franchise is at the height of its popularity. It'll be roughly 4 years until the release of the Nintendo Switch, and with it, the ability to play games like Skyrim on the go. Up until now, portable first-person shooters have been, at their best, great games severely limited by the constraints of their home console, and at their worst, outright awful. But with its announcement at E3 2012, Black Ops Declassified stood as a potential game-changer, a watershed moment in the history of portable gaming. What if a Call of Duty game, graphically on par with its console counterpart, could be released on a handheld with dual analog sticks and triggers? This was the promise then head of PlayStation Jack Tretton made on stage at E3. Unfortunately, looking back some 6 years later, it's clear that this wasn't that game. Make no mistake, Black Ops Declassified is a game so flawed that it might warrant an entire video of its own. But this video is about celebrating the best of the best, and I wouldn't have included it on this list if I didn't believe it deserved a spot. For all its faults, there's a reason I've invested more hours into Declassified than almost any other Vita game, and that's the multiplayer. This game's online component was largely an impersonation of Black Ops 1, and it was a damn good one at that. All the classics, from the FAMAS to the L96A1 sniper rifle, made a return here, along with kill streaks and the prestige ranking system. The game's 7 maps were a mix of new and old, with classics like Nuketown and Grid being reworked into Nuke House and Intel respectively. But the game also drew inspiration from the Modern Warfare series, with the inclusion of the PP90M1 SMG, a Spec Ops-inspired single-player mode, time trials, and a remake of the classic map Shipment from Modern Warfare 1. With these inclusions, Declassified can be seen as a sort of greatest hits collection from both Infinity Ward and Treyarch series. And while the campaign was certainly disappointing, the way that it led into Black Ops 2 with, spoilers, the death of Raul Menendez's father at the player's hands was a nice touch. I still stand by the fact that Insomniac's Resistance trilogy were some of the best games to ever grace the PlayStation 3. 2011's Resistance 3 in particular is, in my opinion, up there with the likes of The Last of Us and Uncharted 2. Given the success of Resistance Retribution on the PSP, a game that's over the years been cemented as one of the system's best games, as well as the franchise's revered legacy among die-hard PlayStation fans, it was fitting that another title in the series would also be released on Sony's new handheld. That game was 2012's Resistance Burning Skies. Set prior to the events of Resistance 2, Burning Skies' 6-hour campaign follows NYPD firefighter Tom Riley during the first days of the Chimeran invasion of the US, as he tries to reunite with his wife and daughter after being separated amid the chaos. Along the way, Riley meets up with the leader of a group of resistance fighters known as the Minutemen. No, not you. The game's campaign covers a variety of settings and landmarks, with one particularly memorable sequence taking place on the George Washington Bridge. While Burning Skies' story may lack the humanity and emotional impact of Resistance 3's, the campaign as a whole is well done, and ultimately does a good job of replicating the feel of Insomniac's trilogy. While development studio Nihilistic did end up half-assing the story mode in Black Ops Declassified, it seems like they made a genuine effort here. They just maybe aren't the best storytellers. Mediocre narrative aside, Burning Skies' campaign checks all the boxes of what you'd expect from a cinematic first-person shooter, with a distinct emphasis on epic set pieces. Early on in the campaign, the player finds himself in the back of a giant Chimeran abomination. You then proceed to advance up the creature's back as you fight smaller alien forces along the way, before finally taking the creature down head-on. This creative concept for a boss fight is something I've never seen in any other shooter, and it's little sequences like this that really elevate this above just being another generic first-person shooter campaign. Burning Skies also features a multiplayer component, but as of 2018 the servers are a complete wasteland, and I wouldn't be surprised if online support for the game soon gets the axe at some point in the near future. I wish I could say this is a shame, but Burning Skies' multiplayer always felt half-baked. Customization was bare bones, clans were non-existent, and you could easily reach max rank in just a few hours. I did have some fun playing online back in 2012, but there are now far better options on the Vita. It may now be revered as the black sheep of the Resistance franchise, but Burning Skies' importance back in 2012 as being among the first proper FPS games on a handheld can't be understated, and the campaign is still a good time some 6 years later. With Uncharted Golden Abyss offering a more cinematic story-driven experience, and Call of Duty Resistance still a ways out, Sony needed a game that would appeal to those hoping for a straight-up shooter experience on their new handheld. Thankfully, that void was filled early on with Unit 13, a third-person shooter from Zipper Interactive. In many ways, Unit 13 can be seen as a spiritual successor to Zipper's legendary SOCOM franchise, switching between third and first-person POVs whenever the player aims down the sights. The game spans 36 missions, each of which requires you to go about a certain objective in a different way. One mission may have you sneaking around a nightclub, while another has you rigging a rocket to blow. It's the kind of variety not typically seen in most modern shooters, and is much more suited to this kind of pick-up-and-play experience than a full-fledged campaign would have been. As you progress through the different operations, you begin to unlock high-value target missions, which require you to assassinate a certain high-ranking individual. These missions are typically more challenging than your standard operation, and are the absolute highlight of the game for me. Executing these missions perfectly yields a kind of satisfaction you just don't get from mindlessly blasting your way through a Call of Duty campaign. Adding even more to the game's gameplay variety is the dynamic mode unlocked after every mission, which effectively switches up the operation's objectives and enemies. It's also a nice touch that the game can be played through in co-op with another player, but I think everyone who's played Unit 13 would agree that this game would have greatly benefited from a PvP multiplayer component. With that said though, Unit 13 is still one of the Vita's best shooters, and serves as a strong send-off to developer Zipper Interactive, who closed up shop shortly after the game's release. In a way, the story of Duke Nukem on the PlayStation Vita is an outright tragedy. Here you have one of the all-time greats, a landmark in the FPS genre in the form of Duke Nukem 3D. While Duke had previously appeared on the handheld in the form of 2002's Duke Nukem Advance, this Vita version of the game would stand as the full Duke Nukem 3D experience on the go. Unfortunately, the game was only available on the system for about a year before Gearbox Software, who owned the Duke Nukem IP, decided to pull it off the PlayStation Store. While I debated whether or not to include a game in this video that's technically no longer available, I've ultimately decided that, as a celebration of shooters on the Vita, Duke Nukem 3D Megaton Edition deserves a spot on our list. The Megaton Edition came with all the updates of the Atomic Edition of the game, from an additional 4th episode to a new weapon and final boss. On top of this, the game also came with all released DLC for the original game in the form of Duke It Out in DC, Duke Nuclear Winter, and Duke Caribbean Life's a Beach. As a fan of classic FPS games, it was a shame to see the post-launch treatment of Duke Nukem 3D on the Vita. This was, to my best recollection, a well-done port, and by far the most authentic Duke Nukem game to ever come out on a handheld. All hail the king. Dating back to 2003, developer Sandlot's long-running Earth Defense Force series has, for years, provided gamers with mindless shooting fun amidst the rise of cinematic, story-driven experiences. I'd argue every system should have at least one EDF game in its library, a game that you can just pop in and play without having to worry about missing important story points or forgetting to grab a certain collectible. Thankfully, the series eventually found its way to the Vita in 2013 in the form of EDF 2017 Portable, a port of an Xbox 360 game from 2006. As the title suggests, the game is set in the year 2017, with an alien species invading Earth. As a member of the Earth Defense Force, it's your job to fight back against these invaders. It's a simple premise that cuts to the chase, and it's enjoyable in an 80s B-movie kind of way. This is definitely one of those cases where the Vita version of the game actually manages to top what's available on console, with the game now featuring online support in the form of co-op missions and competitive play, though you'll probably have some trouble finding an online match in 2018. While EDF may look dated graphically, this concession means the game can handle a huge amount of enemies on screen without taking a major hit in frame rate. As buildings crumble around you and seemingly hundreds of enemies swarm into the city to attack, the game manages to avoid any performance issues, and the sheer amount of destruction happening on screen in EDF is unparalleled on the Vita. In many ways, EDF 2017 Portable is the antithesis of the modern shooter. It doesn't follow a linear campaign or force the player to sit through unnecessary cutscenes. It knows exactly what it is, a fun sandbox to play around in, and its commitment to that vision is what makes this one of the best shooters on the system. So far on the list, we've mainly tackled first and third person shooters. Admittedly, when I think of shooting games, I tend to immediately jump to titles like Uncharted or Halo. But the shooter genre isn't just relegated to these kinds of experiences, you can also have badass games like Helldivers. Developed by Arrowhead Game Studios, the same team behind Magicka, this is a hardcore twin-stick shooter set in a dystopian future, wherein you play as a member of an elite force known as the Helldivers. Your job as a member of this team is to help defend Super Earth amidst an intergalactic war. The game's Starship Troopers-esque story is fun, but it's not why you'll be investing hundreds of hours into Helldivers, should you choose to do so. The real fun to be had here lies in the cooperative play. While you can play Helldivers solo, the game is at its best when you're desperately trying to overcome an alien and insect force in the party of 4. It's no exaggeration to say that, if played with friends, this is one of the Vita's best online experiences. The game is also a cross-buy title, so owning the PS4 version of the game nets you another copy for the PS3 and Vita. What Helldivers lacks in visual prowess, it more than makes up for in addicting, white-knuckle fun. It's challenging while not unfair, and in that regard it's one of the Vita's most unique and rewarding games. Very few franchises carry as much stature in gaming as Metal Gear Solid. Despite its recent mismanagement by Konami, the original Metal Gear games still stand as some of the best games of all time, so it's no question that the Metal Gear Solid HD collection deserves a spot towards the top of our list. Comprised of Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, and MGS3 Snake Eater, this collection brings arguably the best titles in the series to Sony's handheld in full force. This is a port done right, boasting graphics roughly on par with the PS3 version and excellent sound quality. The game even features the original MSX ports of Metal Gear 1 and 2, a testament to the passion poured into this collection. While newcomers to the franchise may have some trouble getting used to the somewhat dated controls of the classic Metal Gear Solid games, overcoming this hurdle is worth it for the sake of getting to experience two of the best stealth action games of all time. And while I wish Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker had been included here, the MGS HD collection still stands as some of the most value you can find on the Vita. Jumping into Metal Gear Solid may seem daunting in 2018, but if you can get past the dated controls, you'll find an amazing storyline and a downright epic experience. The Vita may never have gotten its own Metal Gear Solid game like the PSP did, but this beautifully made collection more than makes up for it. The year is 2007. It's November, and the PS3 has just crossed its first year on the market. Unfortunately, this is no time for celebration at Sony. The system is being utterly eclipsed by the Xbox 360. Outside of a few solid games in the form of Warhawk, Heavenly Sword, Resistance Fall of Man, and Ratchet & Clank Tales of Destruction, the system is falling short on the exclusives front, and the Xbox already has two killer apps in Gears of War and the just-released Halo 3. The new God of War and Killzone games are still years out, but Sony has something else, a game from the studio behind Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter. A game that will permanently change the public's perception of the PS3 and lead to its ultimate success. That game was Uncharted Drake's Fortune. Fast forward to 2011, and Nathan Drake is now a gaming icon. Not only does 2011 mark the release of Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception, but also the launch of Sony's next-generation portable, the PlayStation Vita. Given Drake's Fortune's importance to the PS3, it only made sense that a new Uncharted would spearhead the lineup of Sony's new handheld. Enter Uncharted Golden Abyss, a spin-off developed by Resistance Retribution developer Ben Studio, who are now working on the 2019 PS4 exclusive Days Gone. Set before the events of Drake's Fortune, Golden Abyss follows a younger Drake as he embarks on an adventure in the jungles of Panama in the search of a lost city called Quivira. Ben Studio set out to achieve what many once thought impossible, translating the epic Uncharted series to a handheld while retaining the grand scope, polished gameplay, and witty writing that only Naughty Dog had truly perfected. All doubts were silenced though when Golden Abyss launched in late 2011. Despite being a spin-off for a handheld, the game was actually a lot longer than any Uncharted before it, and in terms of scope felt comparable to the original Uncharted. Rather than opt for the bombastic set pieces and globetrotting feel of Uncharted 2 and 3, Golden Abyss focuses more on a specific location and the mystery surrounding it, which reminded me a lot of Drake's Fortune. Despite not being written by franchise veteran Amy Hennig, Golden Abyss manages to capture the essence of returning characters Nathan Drake and Victor Sullivan, while also introducing new faces to the series, chiefly in the form of Marissa Chase and Jason Dante. While the game's villain, General Roberto Guerrero, falls more in the forgettable camp of Uncharted baddies, Dante and Chase are both likable additions, and I would love to see Chase one day return to the series in some form. On the gameplay front, Golden Abyss checks all the boxes of what makes a great Uncharted game, constantly alternating between cover-based shooting and climbing sections, while sometimes mixing both. It's a simple formula that the series has rarely deviated from outside of the occasional vehicle or puzzle section, but it's one that continues to lend itself to this kind of fast-paced adventure. What Golden Abyss lacks in epic set pieces, it more than makes up for in a heartfelt narrative and beautiful game world to traverse, which is why it deserves a spot in the top 3. 10 years ago, if you had told 8-year-old me playing Black Ops on his DS that one day he'd be able to play Borderlands on the go, I probably wouldn't have believed you. And yet here we are in present day, with the full Borderlands 2 experience in the palm of your hands. Developer Iron Galaxy succeeded in the ambitious task of bringing Gearbox's flagship franchise to the Vita in full force, with the port even boasting all the downloadable content ever released for the game. Explore the biggest game world of any Vita game on the market, as you travel across the beautiful yet deadly planet of Pandora, encountering several memorable characters along the way. The charm of the original Borderlands 2 wasn't lost in translation here. This still stands as, in my opinion, one of the funniest games on the entire system. But while Borderlands 2 delivers on the soundtrack, story, and graphics front, it excels in its gameplay. Boasting over 17 million gun variants, loot-driven character and car customization, a plethora of Easter eggs, and several side activities to partake in, Borderlands 2 will keep you entertained for hundreds of hours. So what's keeping this from the top spot on our list? Yeah, it's the performance issues. A hit in frame rate and visuals was to be expected in transition from console to handheld, but there's no denying that the game looks and feels a bit rough at times. While Iron Galaxy did patch some things after release, the game's frame rate honestly leaves a lot to be desired, and if you've previously played Borderlands 2 on console or PC, then this may seem like too big of a step down. Still, performance issues aside, this is still one of the Vita's best shooters and, in my opinion, one of its best games, period. In the aftermath of the lackluster Resistance Burning Skies and Black Ops Declassified, the question of whether or not the Vita could truly deliver on the FPS front was brought into serious question. Thankfully, any semblance of doubt was at last silenced when Killzone Mercenary released back in 2013. The now sadly defunct Guerrilla Cambridge delivered not only the first true FPS on a handheld, but, in my opinion, the best Killzone game in the entire franchise. Set between the events of Killzone 1 and 2, Mercenary follows Aaron Danner, a former soldier who, following a dishonorable discharge, enlists with the Phantom Talon Corps, a mercenary organization run by the infamous Anders Benoit. The game's 5-hour campaign follows Danner's journey as he winds up taking care of a mysterious child as they attempt to evade forces on both sides of the overshadowing conflict between the ISA and Helldivers. While Mercenary's characters are disappointingly shallow, the game's narrative is well told and can be enjoyed on an 80s action movie level. But what Mercenary lacks in Naughty Dog level storytelling, it more than makes up for elsewhere. Firstly, this is hands down the best looking Vita game ever made, and prior to the release of the Nintendo Switch, possibly the most graphically impressive game to ever grace a handheld system. The campaign, though brief, is meant to be replayed several times to explore the missions in a different way. While this is still a very linear story, every mission feels like a brand new sandbox to explore and play around in. The multiplayer, however, is Mercenary's strongest aspect. Cambridge succeeded in crafting an addictive, robust online experience, filled with a breadth of customization. Every map is unique, and not simply ripped from the campaign, with many featuring unique characteristics that can change up the gameplay in the middle of a gunfight. While I've never been someone who plays a lot of multiplayer and first-person shooters, I've poured hundreds of hours into Mercenary's multiplayer component, even going so far as to reach max rank. That's a testament to just how fantastic this game truly is, standing in my opinion as one of the system's all-time greatest hits. Which at last brings us back to the question posed at the beginning of this video. Did the Vita live up to its potential as a portable system capable of providing console-quality shooters? In retrospect, of the 5 FPS games to ever release on the console, one was ultimately taken off the PlayStation Store, 2 were outright bad in most regards, and another suffered from overambition. Among these, only Killzone Mercenary ever really measured up to what you'd see on a home console. But while the Vita could have delivered more in the way of FPS games, I believe the system did ultimately provide gamers with a strong selection of shooters in general. Once you broaden your sights beyond first-person shooters, you'll find fantastic third-person shooters in Uncharted Golden Abyss and Unit 13, with an excellent experience from a top-down perspective as well in the form of Helldivers. When it comes to shooters on the Vita, I suppose this really is a case of quality over quantity. So here we are at the end of the video. I had a lot of fun looking back at some 7-odd years of shooters on the Vita. This system truly is remarkable, with games like Killzone Mercenary and Uncharted Golden Abyss standing as a testament to that fact. I hope returning Vita gamers found this trip down memory lane entertaining, and hopefully I've also helped some new Vita owners single out some of the system's best shooters. As always, for more videos on all things PlayStation, stay tuned. Until next time, this has been Fixation.